Alright, hey guys, this is Miss Hewitt, and we're about to read the last chapter of The River Between Us. So it says, Time and the Mississippi River. So I guess now we're going back to present day. Chapter 15. It was that summer of 1916 when my dad took me and my little brothers down home to see his folks. Time was a different shape in Grand Tower, Illinois, and so when we got there, Dad was young Bill, and we were young Bill's boys. Summer afternoons were longer in southern Illinois than anywhere else, and hotter. The sun hangs eternally just off-center in the blinding sky. Dad spent the afternoons mostly up in Great Aunt Delphine's room. He sat at her bedside by the window that looks out across the river to where the wedding party drowned long ago. As one afternoon folded into the next, I began to see this was another reason for our visit. His Aunt Delphine was dying. Would she become another Grand Tower haunt like the ghost woman with the flying gray hair who darted across the road and into the Mississippi? Like that ghost who grieved the loss of a son, though he was still alive? My little brothers, Raymond and Earl, trailed Great Uncle Noah on all his afternoon chores. They'd never seen a one-armed man before, and this one could do what other people needed both hands for. He could peel an apple, kill a rat, bait a hook, all kinds of things deeply interesting to 5-year-old boys. They had no idea he was entertaining them. They just thought that he was going about his business. The only one of us who napped was old Dr. Hutchins. He sat in his porch rocker, transparent with age, courteous even in drooping sleep. He had the dignity I saw in my dad. His clean white hands were folded neatly in his lap. These were the hands that had amputated Noah's arm in the first year of the war after the Battle of Belmont. And how many more arms and legs, how many thousands, through all the blood-sick years of war. I knew the story because Grandma Tilly told me. She was a talker when she got going, and she could bring it all back for you. I saw for myself the amputated arm sinking in the churning river as they brought the wounded back to Cairo. I still see it. Neither age nor the weather slowed Grandma Tilly. She was a whirlwind from early morning on, cooking and baking for extra mouths. She was up and down the stairs, fetching and carrying for Aunt Delphine, and not letting anyone else do it. Carrying her slops, too, because there was no plumbing in the house. But she found a corner of every afternoon to round me up and lead me to the crest of the Devil's Backbone, to a flat rock they called the Devil's Footstool, just among themselves. It had aeroplane views out of the river and Tower Rock. There we sat, both of us barefoot, while she brought back the old times for me. She had handed over the past like a parasol, seizing these days to do it. She couldn't sit idle there, of course. She didn't know how to be idle. She brought an old sewing basket with pearls and little shells on the lid, and her mending. She darned over a milk-glass egg and spun out her yarns. At first I didn't know how to listen to tales that old, but we began to edge across the years toward each other, Grandma Tilly and I. I began to see the yellow lamplight on their faces, just a flicker at first. I heard calliope music waving over the water. At every turn the story took, I remembered I was just about the age now that they were then, except for Cass. She was younger. What had happened to Cass? She's down there. Grandma Tilly pointed a bent finger to a long dip between the backbone and another outcropping called Oven Rock. It looked like overgrown wilderness. It was a graveyard, but they didn't keep it up. By then I knew how she worked to keep the sentiment out of her voice. Still, it was about to break through. She died young. She died the year after the war, 1866. She was 17. As Dr. Hutchins called it diphtheria. She always spoke of him as Dr. Hutchins. She addressed him as Dr. Hutchins. If it hadn't been diphtheria, it would have been something else. I washed her poor bird body and dressed her in the springed dimity she wore that night of the show. I put her in her coffin and wouldn't let nobody near her. I held her in my arms one last time, and then I let her go again. She gave up on life after Calinda had left us. I waited for more, and then said, well, why did Calinda leave? Well, she was too dark to stay, wasn't she? She couldn't pass. I always thought she was the color of honey at the bottom of the jar. I expect she thought people would put 2 and 2 together, and it would give Delphine away. You know how there were always rumors about them. No, she had it in her mind to go to California. She said out there she'd be light enough to be Spanish, and she was good with money. She always had some put by for the journey. She was a true bird of passage, always ready to take flight. Grandma Tilly looked out across the river, to the west. A hard journey in them days, before there was a train to take you all the way to California. We knew she'd go, and I was scared Cass would go with her. I thought the trip might kill her, but of course staying behind is what finally done her in. Clinda was what they call a conjure woman down yonder in New Orleans. She could tell your fortune, and there'd have been a market for that in more built-up areas. Cass had the gift, too. It's what drawed them together, closer than sisters. But I suppose it was too late for Cass. I think she'd been worn out by her visions before Clinda come among. A hot breeze stirred the trees. We never heard tell of Clinda again. I expect she prospered. She had all those talents, didn't she? But we never heard. They had a brother, too, remember, in Paris, France? But they were the free people of color, and after the war they had to find new selves. I suppose it was just better to cut their ties and go it alone. Think how many more must be like them, perched very quiet up on some family trees, safe now from being called ugly names. That was the last afternoon of our visit. I had taken Grandma Tilly the week to tell her story. She bit off a thread. She didn't have all her teeth, not nearly all. Then she stole another look at where the graveyard had been, down where Cass was. "And your pa?" I said. "He's down there?" "Yes, he's down there. We didn't bury Cass next to him. There wasn't any point in that. And of course Mama's not down there." Grandma Tilly turned away from me. "Mama went in the river." It was time to leave then, and somehow I wasn't ready. We climbed up off our rock, the Devil's Footstool, for the last time. Grandma Tilly had to look way up at me. I was getting to be what she called a big, tall galoot. We started down the backbone to the river. "They never did get married, she said almost offhand. "You're old enough to hear it." "Who didn't?" "Delphine and Noah." "They never got married, but—" "Oh, we put it around that they were married. We said they went to the Centralia, or somewhere to tie the knot. I forget now where they said they went, but they never did it. It liked to break Noah's heart, but Delphine wouldn't have it. She said her kind didn't marry white men, and she was passing for white. She said it would betray all her traditions, and her mother, her maman, would turn over in her grave. Her mother died during the war, when the New Orleans was occupied by our troops. We got that word. But anyway, Delphine would never marry Noah, though they were more married than most. But you know how she is. If she makes up something in her mind, or lapses into the French language, you just as well get out of her road. She'd make a mule look agreeable. I remember one more thing Grandma Tilly told me. She said that was like the Mississippi River. It only flows in one direction. She meant you could never go back, but of course she had taken me back. We went on down to the house. She had a way of telling you so much, you thought you'd heard it all, and I knew where she'd learned that. The night before we left Grand Tower, Great Uncle Noah wrung the neck of a fat briar, to my little brother's great excitement. Grandma Tilly fried it in batter for our picnic hamper. She loaded us down with deviled eggs and buttermilk biscuits. She piled us high with jars of her rhubarb preserves and looked around and around herself to see what else she could have had. We filled our bottles from the well. Dad personally filed down the points on the spark plugs and made an early start the next day. The 3 old folks were on the porch to see us go. We said our goodbyes to great Aunt Delphine the night before, up in her cluttered room under the portrait of her yellow-haired father. She couldn't speak, but those great fringed violet eyes ate us alive. The touch of her little pillowed hand lingered on mine long after. We left in the cool of the morning. Being parked on the backbone helped because the Ford started better on a slant. I got the engine to catch more after 5 minutes. We settled the little boys down as berries now on the back seat, brown as berries now on the back seat. Then in the miraculous morning, Dad climbed up into the heaving car on the passenger side. He was letting me drive. My heart sang. I was to drive and let out the brake and fiddle with the gas lever so that Dad could turn back and wave to them up on the porch. He waved until the house, and then the hill, and then the town were swallowed in our dust. We made good time going home, keeping the river on our left, retracing our route, though we had more flats. Raymond and Earl wanted to stop the night and make our camp where we had before. They wanted this trip to have an exact shape. Dad pretty well convinced them that we found our original campground when it was time to pull off that evening, though we never found a trace of the old campfire. We built another one and ate better that night than weenies on sticks. After the dust of the day, there were circles around our eyes where the goggles had been. The twins were nodding off against each other before the dying fire. I sat next to Dad on the running board. As if he'd waited for this moment, he said, "I've been thinking of getting into the war, if the country does." It shook me. Then I saw this was another reason for the trip. "Y'all think I'm too old for a soldier," he said, "and maybe I am, but they'll need doctors. I didn't want to spring it on you at the last minute. You'd have to take over at home till I got back, but they're for your mother and the boys." In the quiet, I heard my dad waiting. He wanted to be all right with me. He wanted my approval. Nothing this grown-up had happened to me before. This was something Grandma Tilly couldn't understand, how war promises a boy it can make a man out of him. Well, Your dad went to the war, didn't he? I said. Yes, he did. They can't fight a war without My father isn't Dr. Hutchins, Dad said. Noah's my father. I grabbed a hold of the running board. The night revolved around me. And Delphine's my mother. She's slipping away, and I wanted this time with her. We couldn't be mother and son, you see. She didn't trust the world. She didn't trust the town. She never knew when somebody would see her for who she was and turn on her. She wouldn't hand that on me. It could have closed too many doors in my face. So I was named for Dr. William Hutchins. They had no other children, the doctor and your Grandma Tilly, none of their own, so I was their son too. As you said, I had 4 parents. He didn't mention love, and it wasn't a word they used, but there was plenty they didn't mention. I'm proud of every drop of blood in me, Dad said, kept quiet from waking the boys. One day when you've had time to think it over, I hope you'll be proud too. I remembered Grandma Tilly speaking of the blood hurrying through her veins. Now I felt that blood hurry through mine, flowing like the Mississippi River, as my dad and I sat there on the running board under a sky crowded with stars. I didn't have to think it over. I was proud of anything that made me his son. I was proud of being Noah's grandson and Delphine's grandson. I was older now too, a lot older than when this trip began, older and looking ahead. One day I'd tell a son of my own this story for who we were, a son or a daughter with enormous violet eyes. And that is the end of The River Between Us.